Hey everyone, I'm Jackie from Madam Heart Cross Stitch, and this video is all about loop starting and ending methods. In this video, I'm going to be showing you 3 different variations of a loop start and even a loop end. But before we even begin, I have to get something out of the way because whenever I have posted alternate starting or ending methods in previous videos, I tend to always run across a few comments of people that are either confused or even a little bit snarky, kind of questioning why you would ever use anything other than the way that I think most of us are taught, which is running your needle under a few existing stitches along the back of your work, pulling the tail through, and using that to anchor your threads. Now, I love that method. I use it myself many times. So let me explain quickly why you would ever even think about using a different way. So for me, different projects are going to require different methods to make it as easy as possible to anchor my threads. So when I'm working on a smaller project that is easily going to fit on a smaller hoop or Q-snap, I may very well hold this in my hand while I'm stitching. And in this scenario, it's really easy for me to flip to the back of my work, run my needle under some existing stitches, and anchor my threads. However, as I start to move to larger projects, I really don't like having a hoop that I just move all around my project as I go. I really like to use larger frames to fit my project on. Now, this one isn't even that large, but this is not something I want to hold in my hand. It definitely gets heavy and awkward. So when I'm using a larger frame, I always prefer to use a stand. And yes, there are some stands in particular that do make it somewhat easy to still access the back of your work. But do you know what's even easier? Not having to flip my work over at all and just working from the front as much as possible. Using a stand is also really helpful for anyone who's dealing with arthritis or joint pain, because even holding a small hoop in your hand for even a short period of time definitely puts strain on your wrist. The last thing I also tend to run into quite a bit, especially when I'm stitching over one on higher count fabrics, is the back of my work. It gets really tight back there. So it's not always easy to take a needle and wiggle it under existing stitches along the back, especially when you're stitching over one on higher count fabrics. So if you've never run into a scenario where you need to do anything different than just flipping your work over and anchoring your threads along the back, that is great. And you are, of course, more than welcome to continue doing that. But at least for me, the number of threads I'm using, the fabric count, and the project size are all going to impact which methods I tend to go to when it comes to starting or ending my threads. So I really love having as many options as possible when it comes to starting or stopping my threads so that I can find the easiest path forward in any stitching scenario. So to kick off these tutorials, we are going to start with the GOAT, the one, the original, the loop start. So the best thing about the loop start is not only how quick and easy it is, but how secure it is. The downside, of course, is that this standard loop start really only works in specific scenarios and typically only when you're using an even number of strands. But let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so for this standard loop start, the most important part is really prepping our floss and putting it on the needle. So if I'm stitching with 2 strands of floss, I want to pull out a piece of thread that is double the length I want it to be. So here I have one long piece of thread that's double the length I need. I'm going to match my thread up by taking the 2 ends, putting them together, and I'm going to thread this on my needle. So now I have my needle threaded like normal on one side, and on the other end, I've created a loop from where I had that floss folded in half. So now I'm going to go ahead and bring my needle up in whichever square you're stitching in. And now I want to be really careful. I'm not going to pull all the way through. You can see I still have a little bit of length back here on the back, but I'm going to go ahead and complete the first half of my stitch. And now I'm going to flip to the back, take my needle, put it through that loop, and then pull tight. And that is incredibly secure because it's just one continuous piece of floss. And now I can go ahead and just continue stitching like normal. My thread is nice and anchored, and that is your standard loop start. Now, like I mentioned in the beginning, there are a lot of scenarios, for me at least, where I don't want to flip to the back of my work. The good news is there is a super simple variation of that standard loop start that you can easily work from the front. All right, so just like when we did a loop start from the back, I have my floss prepped the exact same way. It is double the length I need, and then I folded it in half, threading my needle with the loose ends, leaving a loop intact on the other end. So now, instead of pulling my needle up from the back like I normally would, I'm going to bring my needle down in the top right corner of my starting stitch. Bring your needle down in whichever corner. And you can do this in any corner you want. It would just be based on the way that you like to make your stitches. So for me, I'm now going to bring my needle up through the bottom left corner, which is where I would normally start my stitch. And I don't want to pull all the way through, but I have this little loop here on the front. I'm going to go ahead, take my needle and run it through the loop, pulling it tight. And now I'm going to bring my needle down right behind the loop we created and pull it through. And it's just going to go ahead and pull that little loop to the back side. So it secures it the exact same way like we did in the loop start when we caught it from the back. This time you're just working from the front and then pulling the loop to the back side. But it is just as secure and just as great. It's just a little bit more helpful if you're maybe working with a stand and don't want to flip your work over to the back. It just makes for a really nice and easy loop start from the front. Now that you've seen the standard loop start in action, clearly its uses are limited to when you're using an even number of strands that can easily be folded in half. But what if your thread isn't long enough to fold in half? Or maybe you're using an odd number of strands, like 1 or 3. Perhaps you're using blended threads. Well, that is where this modified loop start comes in handy. All right, so let's say for whatever reason, you cannot create a loop at the end of your threads. Maybe you're working with an odd number of strands, like I am here. I have 3 strands of floss on my needle. But this is a really great variation of a loop start, and it is also worked from the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my needle down in the top left corner of my stitch. And again, you can change the corner that you bring your thread down in. It really just depends on the way you make your stitches. I always like to make my stitches starting from the bottom left corner, but you'll kind of see how this all comes together in a minute. So now I've got a little bit of a tail here. I'm going to use my finger to hold that down. And now I'm going to bring my needle up in the top right corner of my stitch. I'm going to pull it tight again, just securing the tail right here with my finger. And now I'm going to create my own loop. So I'm going to bring my needle back down in the same hole I just came up in. And I've created a little loop here on the end. So now I'm going to bring my needle up to essentially complete the first leg of my stitch. So I'm bringing it up in that bottom left corner. I'm going to pull my needle through the loop. And then just like with the loop start we did from the front, I'm going to put my needle behind the loop we just created. And pull everything to the back of my fabric. Now, I really like to give this a nice big tug from both the back, I'm tugging right here if you can't tell, and from the front. And that's how I kind of make sure that it is in fact secure. Now with my scissors, I'm going to trim this tail loose and go ahead and complete my stitching. And then real quick, just to show you what that looks like from the back. So you can see it essentially created almost like a small little knot along the back there. All right. So one thing I have noticed using that modified loop start is occasionally they'll kind of pull right through. That's why you saw me kind of take that extra step in the beginning to tug it nice and tight to make sure that it was in fact secure. I notice this more on the like silkier fabrics that I'm using. Like if I'm using a Jobelan, those are really soft and silky. And that's where I notice those modified loop starts tend to come loose more often. So I'm going to show you one extra trick you can do if you're having trouble with them staying secure. So we're just going to start by repeating the process for the modified loop start. I'm going to bring, again, my needle down for me in the top left corner of my stitch. I'm going to go ahead and anchor that tail with my finger and then bring my needle up and then right back down in the top right corner of my stitch, creating a little loop. So now what I want to do is I'm going to actually stitch over the tail to help secure everything. So I'm going to bring it over, hold it down with my finger, and now I'm going to complete that first leg of my stitch coming through the loop I created. And just like before, I'm going to bring my needle back down, pull that loop to the back. And now as I complete my first couple of stitches, I'm just going to continue to stitch over that tail, which is really going to anchor it. Now with a couple of stitches done, I'm going to go ahead and trim the tail. And I'm still going to come back over and complete the top legs of those stitches. Now, this is going to make those first couple of stitches maybe a little bit bulkier because you've got that extra tail along the front. But this is one way to just make sure everything is super nice and secure if you're wanting to do a modified loop start and having any issues with it coming loose. So now that we know how to begin a new thread using a loop start, how about a loop end? Now, I first saw this method right here on YouTube many, many years ago by an awesome video posted by the Needlebug. And I think in her video, she even attributes this method to someone else who she had learned it from. But whoever invented this method originally, hats off to them. This has come in handy so many times over the years. All right, friends. So now for the loop end, essentially, I'm just going to continue stitching until I get to the last leg of my last stitch. And now I'm going to bring my needle up in the corner of the stitch that I would normally go down last. So for me, this is going to be the top left corner of my stitch. Just like with the loop start, we're going to go ahead and create our own loop. So I'm going to bring my needle right back down in the same hole. I'm going to leave this little loop here on the end and then come up to create the last leg of my stitch, just like I normally would. For me, that's coming up in the bottom right corner. And now I'm going to bring my needle through the loop, pull it tight, bring my needle back down behind the loop, and then pull it to the back of my work. Now, I can't just leave it like this. What I need to do is place a tacking stitch. Again, I'm demoing this on 14 count Aida. This is not the type of situation where I would be using this method because for 14 count, I would just use a pin stitch instead. But long story short, what you want to do is just bring your needle down a few stitches, and I'm just going to place a tacking stitch. And you just want to place a tacking stitch in a spot where you know this section will eventually get covered by stitches, which is going to secure that tacking stitch when all is said and done. So I'm going to go ahead and just snip my tail from the back. And you can see my tacking stitch is a little bit visible, but again, as long as this is going to be covered with stitches down the road, that tacking stitch will disappear underneath additional stitches. All right, and from the back, you can see that loop end creates a little bit of a knot back here, very similar to the modified loop start. So there you have it, loop starts and even a loop end. Let me know if you use any of these methods, and if so, which ones. I know for me at least, I use the standard loop start anytime that it is an option. The other ones I do also use here and there. Like I mentioned earlier, at least for me, it really tends to be project dependent, what's going to make the most sense and be the most secure. I will say I'm also a big fan of a pin stitch. So if you would like to see a video similar to this one, but focusing on pin stitches, please do let me know. Once again, I'm Jackie from Adam Hart Cross Stitch. If you like this video and want to see more content like this, please do all the good things, like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, happy stitching.